The Soviet Invasion of Afghanistan by Matthew DeCoyer, Evan Van Campen,
Ethan Partridge,
Jack Evans, Malcolm Morrison, and Weston Lewis. The Soviet invasion of Afghanistan was a brutal 10-year conflict between thousands of Soviet troops and many Afghan rebel groups in a struggle over the Soviet Union's control over Afghanistan and South Central Asia during the Cold War. Prior to this war, conflict was brewing in Afghanistan as democracy and communism fought to control this desert country. In 1973, the Afghan military overthrew King Zahir and the monarchy, replacing it with a communist regime. President Daud, the new leader of Afghanistan, attempted to convert the Muslim population of Afghanistan to support communism, who were anti-communist because it was seen as an atheist ideology. Meanwhile, the new communist government forged close ties with the Soviet Union, launched ruthless purges of all opposition, and began extensive land and social reforms that were pressed by the largely Muslim and largely anti-communist population. Insurgencies rose up against the government among both tribal and urban groups, and collectively were known as the Mujahideen. In order to protect their new ally and fellow communist regime, the Soviet government chose to intervene, and on December 24th, 1979, they prepared to fly and march 30,000 troops into neighboring Afghanistan in order to defeat the Mujahideen and support the communist government.
These military actions could be better described as an intervention into the greater Afghan Civil War, in accordance with the Soviet Brezhnev Doctrine.
In Washington, the invasion of Afghanistan was met with alarm. The United States and their many European allies, as well as many neighboring Islamic nations, demanded a reasoning from the Soviet government, but were met with silence. President Jimmy Carter, the president at that time, decided that the United States had to take action and prevent the Soviet Union and the communist government in Afghanistan from taking over.
While the United States and their allies prepared to take action, the Soviet army set to work rooting out the Mujahideen and other anti-communist groups. They had success in the beginning and were able to quickly take control of the major urban centers, military bases, and strategic installations. In the days following the invasion, the Soviet army had over 125,000 personnel in Afghanistan.
The sheer quantity of Soviet forces forced the Mujahideen and the remaining Afghan government to flee the urban areas, now controlled by the Soviets, and retreat for the mountains and rural areas of Afghanistan, where they could operate without opposition. 3 days after the initial invasion, the Soviet Special Forces, the Spetsnaz, assassinated President Hafizul Alni and proceeded to occupy important government and military targets. Soviet advisors instated a new communist, Barbara Karmal, as president in order to form a Soviet-controlled puppet government. By 1980, the Soviet military began an offensive against the Mujahideen in the rural areas, accidentally killing many civilians which gained support for the rebels. Heavy fighting in these areas took a great toll on the better-equipped Soviets. The Soviet military utilized their whole arsenal of weapons, including the T-34 tank, the MiG jet, and the Mi-24 Hind helicopter, as well as personal weapons including the AK-47, the PKM machine gun, and the RPG rocket launcher.
On the other hand, the Mujahideen
were only equipped with few small arms, tanks, and other weaponry to fight the invaders. In order to make up for this, the Mujahideen split into smaller groups and adopted guerrilla warfare, or the tactic in which a smaller, more mobile force uses hit-and-run ambushes to fight a larger, less mobile force.
This warfare continued until the mid-1980s, when the United States, under President Ronald Reagan, as well as their European and Middle Eastern allies, decided to get involved. These countries provided the Mujahideen and the other rebel groups with weapons, money, and vehicles to fight the Soviets, without the United States and their allies getting directly involved. One of the most effective weapons provided by the United States was the Stinger anti-aircraft missile, which had the ability to shoot down Soviet helicopters and other slow-moving aircraft that were crucial to maintain Soviet supply routes, transport Soviet personnel, and overall allow the Soviet military to operate as it had for the years prior to the Stinger's introduction. Known as the Stinger effect, this weapon turned the tides in the war and gave the Mujahideen the advantage by slowing the flow of Soviet soldiers, supplies, and weapons into the war zone.
As the Mujahideen's tactics evolved, Soviet casualties started piling up. Senior Soviet military leaders resisted changes to their methods of using large amounts of infantry and armor to flush out and defeat the enemy, at the expense of their soldiers. Soviet tactics meant to defeat NATO on the plains of Europe did not work in the deserts and mountains of Afghanistan, causing heavy losses. Soviet morale and supplies were low, and soldiers began to question the war. While Soviet and communist soldiers attempted to achieve their goal of destroying the Mujahideen, Soviet advisors went to work on establishing their puppet government. The new leader of Afghanistan, Barbara Karmal, worked with Soviet agents to suppress opposition and force communism under the rural areas of Afghanistan. This only gained even more support for the Mujahideen and weakened the communist Afghan government. Soviet soldiers and citizens alike began to see no real end to the war and put pressure on the government of the Soviet Union to withdraw. After 10 years, the Soviet military began their withdrawal from Afghanistan because of its costs in terms of money and people, and left the job of defeating the Mujahideen to the official Afghan army, and by 1989 were mostly gone. Known as the Soviet Union's Vietnam, this war was important to the Cold War as it helped lead to the eventual collapse of the Soviet Union and proved the saying that even the smallest flea can drive a big dog crazy.
In the end, the war left over 1 million dead and worsened relations between the Soviet Union and the rest of the world, who largely disapproved of the Soviets' actions. This led to the U.S. boycott of the Moscow Olympics in 1980 and issue of a trade embargo with the USSR, which negatively affected the Soviet economy. On the other hand, this left Afghanistan in ruins and led to another civil war that still has a lasting impact to this day.